it's in Norman, and we're on 10 acres. And it's pretty nice. It's a log house. It's a log construction house. It's custom. All the control cables and all of the transmission lines enter and exit the house under the slab. So we didn't have to make any holes in the side of the house or go through the ceiling or anything like that. And this picture is taken from about where my 80-meter off-center fed vertical is. And that's this one right here. It's a Force 12 Sigma 80. Force 12 was bought by JK Antennas, and they're going to start making these again after they make some changes, but I've had it for a long time. And it works great for DX. It's not so good for stateside stuff because the radiation angle is awfully low, which is why it's so good for DX and not so good for stateside stuff. But it's a nice antenna. It was expensive when I bought it, and it got more expensive. And then Force 12 stopped making it, and the other group bought them. JK Antennas bought them, and now they're resurrecting some of the line. But out in that same area, I have some low band receive antenna. It's a set of K9AY loops, and you can see the control box for those right there where my little cursor is. Set of relays so I can choose which loop to use and reverse the phase so it goes the other direction. These have their main lobes point northeast, northwest, southeast, and southwest. It's a cardioid pattern, so it's not very sharp, but it has a pretty deep null off the back. And it's not a beverage. It's not as good as beverage antennas. I didn't put out enough transmission lines for beverage antennas because there's a field in the back that I would love to run one through, but it's hayed every year by a neighbor. I could have run it through the woods, but I didn't. So I don't have any beverages. This is my receiving antennas. This is my HF and my 160 meter antenna. We're looking up the tower. It's an HD BX 48 tower, and there's 8 feet of chrome moly mast sticking out of the top of it, and going from the top, working my way down to the bottom. We start with a discone. It's good for 100 megahertz to about a gigahertz, and then there's a KT34A tribander with these funny linear loading parts. Then there's an arrow antenna corner reflector for 2 meters and 70 centimeters. Then there's a Cushcraft DW3 dipole for 12, 17, and 30 meters. You can see one of the traps right there, but it's turned 90 degrees from the tribander and is parallel to the 40 meter Cushcraft CD2 40 meter beam, which is right here. And so there's the dipole is pretty much parallel to the boom. I turn these 90 degrees so they don't interact with the tribander. Finally, what else is here? Well, we have my weather station because I'm a research meteorologist. And this wire here is the shunt feed for 160 meters. So here's a different perspective. We happen to be looking up a wire that's the 75 meter inverted V suspended at about 40 feet. I use that for stateside stuff and for when I play on AM. This is where the coaxial and control cables exit the ground from running under the driveway and under the slab. And the 160, this box right here contains an L network with a vacuum variable and a coil, and it's a reversible 24-volt motor that I have a switch in the shack for. And this is the feed point right here for 160 meter shunt feed. So that's how I tune the shunt for whatever frequencies I want. I can get a really good match from about 1800 kilohertz to about 1950. At 1950, I kind of run out of sauce. So here's the equipment complement that's in the shack right now. And what I have is, this is a World Radio Labs Globe Champion Model 350. And this is a Hammerland HQ170. This is a Tentec Orion 2 and Kenwood TS930S AT. Then we have a frequency counter, so it's easier to know what frequency I'm on. Yeah, VFO dial is pretty accurate, but it's not as accurate as a counter. Kenwood KC10 clock, the B&W 334 dummy load watt meter. Here's an SP930 speaker, which I have connected up to the HQ170. Time wave DSP in the 5.9 Plus, which I use for the Kenwood. Here's an LP100A digital vector RF watt meter. It's really handy. Here's my AL1200 amplifier, which I've modified for 4,000 volts on the B+. This little box, well, there's my 2 meter, 70 centimeter rig. This little box here switches, allows me to remotely switch between the disc cone and the corner reflector. This is a remote coax switch for position, so I can choose which antenna I transmit and receive on up on the tower. Here's a green heron RT21 rotator control. This is the control box for the K9AY newts. This is a interior coax switch, so I can choose which transmission line I'm using. And this is a Ameritron ATR15 antenna tuner. A little bit more detail. Here's the boat anchors. These two radios were bought in 1959 by my dad, and in their day, they were considered pretty high-end radios. Output of this one, everything back then was measured by input. So the input's about 350 watts. Output was about 165. It's been modified. He kept them in working condition. I changed the PA tubes in it from AX9909s, which are made out of unobtainium and extremely expensive and somewhat fragile, to Motorola 8643s, which are pretty tough. There have been a few more mods. The 8643s are power tetrodes, so I made a regulated screen supply for them. I removed all the high vacuum and gas rectifiers with solid state rectifiers. My dad modified the VFO, so it's very, very stable. The HQ170, except for replacing the high vacuum rectifier, is pretty much stock. I replaced the high vacuum rectifier with a solid state rectifier. Oh, also, Globe Champ had a selenium rectifier in it, which was going to fail. And I understand it's difficult to get the stench out, so that was replaced as well. Next on the list, this is kind of the main operating position. These are the radios that I use most of the time. An Orion Tentec 2. It has all of the roofing filters in it. It's 600 hertz, 1000 hertz, 1.8 kilohertz, 2.4 kilohertz, 20 kilohertz. And it has an RX366 subreceiver, which is optional. It's essentially a receiver out of an Eagle, Tentec Eagle. And it also has a 600 hertz, 1.8 kilohertz, and 6 kilohertz roofing filters in it. This is the TS930S. It was also a top-end radio of its day when I bought it in 1984. This was a top-end radio when I bought it in 2007. But I mean, it's still, these are still really good radios, but there's better, more capable radios out there. The 930 has international radio IF filters in it, and it's in a international radio roofing filter, crystal roofing filter for the 40 megahertz IF. Here's the rest of the stuff. You can see it a little bit better. My keyer is a KC1 Kansas City keyer. Here's my bencher paddles, a Heil microphone. It's a Shure 404, which is an old version of the 444 hand mic. And here's a K1EA wind keyer for when I do contesting. That's pretty much the place. There it is, N5OP. And the tower also doubles as a flagpole, so see you in the pileups. Let's go to a couple of other members. Gary McCroy.
Hey, Kim, before you move on, one question in the chat was, what make and model of beams do you have? And I was thinking they were icicle model, but...
Yeah, well, depends on the day. The The tri-bander is a KLM KT34A, which is now made by a different company and it's probably better made. This one's hung together. The rotatable dipole for 12, 17, and 30 meters is Cushcraft. And the 40-meter beam is also a Cushcraft. It's an old, its old model number was a C40 CD2, and now I forget what the new version is, but they've made some mechanical upgrades, and the new version is a lot tougher. It's the same beam electrically and from an RF standpoint, but it's a lot more mechanically robust.
Okay.
Right.
Before you move on, let me just mention we've had a few more people join. Tim K3LR is one of them.
Hey Tim, thank you.
I was going to ask or just mention to everybody, if you have a question, feel free to raise your digital hand here. And also, if we don't have your call sign, please put it in the chat window and I'll add it to the attendees list. We're just trying to keep a list of who attended the meeting.
I don't want to put Tim on the spot, but someday I would love to talk you into giving us a presentation on your station. You did that once for the OU Amateur Radio Club, and I would just, if you haven't done it for the Oklahoma DX Association, even if you have, do it again. Anything else up here in the chat window?
Not yet. Nope.
Okay. All right.
Go ahead.
Well, let's go into Gary's station. He's our Southeast Oklahoma DX Association director. So here are the station notes that he sent. Basically, what he's got: an Alpha 89, and the ALS Ameritron ALS 1306, which is a solid state amplifier. I think they're 600 watts. He's got a MFJ 998 auto tuner and a nice watt meter and nice 2-meter rig. All this stuff is running on a Lenovo. He's got some pretty hefty power supplies. 70 amp Astron and a 50 amp Ameritron. So let's see. He's got bencher panels, and his antennas, which we're going to see here in a minute, are a hex beam and a multiband vertical, which settled in the top of a tree when the rope broke, and a Cushcraft Ringo Ranger. So, gee, that HF radio looks really familiar. I got one just like it. There's his Alpha 89 and his IntelliTuner. So it's a nice compact shack. It's not spread out like mine is. There's his spider beam. These are actually pretty fascinating things. They're tougher than a quad, but still lots of wires up in the air. And finally, his Ringo Ranger. So if nobody here has seen one, now you have. And they were quite the 2-meter antenna for their day. Richard Rule, W5GLD, sent in a few pictures. He's been active for almost as long as I have, but he's on more bands than I am. And he likes the low Earth orbit satellite stuff and weak signal VHF, UHF. And I got to put a plug in here for Randy because he does stuff like that too. I'm not on the VHF and UHF bands very much, but we do have some members that are, and I don't do that very much, but I deeply respect those that do because that's a completely different world from HF. Richard's a life member of the league, so am I. A life member of AMSAT. He's a member of QCWA, and obviously us too. And I believe, unless I miss my guess, Richard's a retread. He came back to Oklahoma and joined up with us. So here's his backyard, and he also said he's getting more active on HF. And here's his satellite antennas, and here's his, I'm guessing it's his dish for 1296. It's not big enough for anything else. And so those are the pictures that I have from members, from other members. And I will stop there.